Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this webinar entitled Integration Challenges and Opportunities in the Economic Development and Refugee Resettlement Arenas. My name is Margie McHugh, and I am the Director of the Migration Policy Institute's National Center on Immigrant Integration Policy. You'll be hearing a bit from me today, as well as from Steve Tabachman, who is a leading thinker and organizer around the role of immigration policies and immigrants and refugees more generally in supporting local economic development, and also from Annie Wilson, the Chief Strategy Officer with Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services. She's got several decades of experience in the refugee resettlement field, and we're delighted that both Annie and Steve are joining us today to discuss these two very distinct issues in the integration arena, but also obviously with some interconnections between them. So I'll introduce both of them more fully in a few minutes, but in the meantime, I have a few housekeeping announcements, and I'm going to give quick background on the historic integration policy-focused efforts that President Obama has set into motion with his announcements last November. So in terms of logistics, slides and audio, as you can see there on the screen from today's webinar, will be available on our website. You see the address right there. If you have any problems accessing the webinar, I know a few of you have already been sending some emails to us here. Please use that events@migrationpolicy.org email. And you can also call us on that number there. We'd love for you to use the Q&A chat function on the right of your screen. Send us questions at any time. We'll be compiling them. We've left plenty of time at the end of the presentations for Q&A, so we look forward to hearing your questions and comments. You may also write us at that events@migrationpolicy.org address with your questions. So just to get us started, many of you already are familiar with strands of our work here at the National Center on Immigrant Integration Policy. We've made some very big investments in research and policy analysis in education pipeline issues. We also have done fairly robust work, particularly with state and local governments and agencies around language access issues. But of course, the webinar today and this series of webinars that we're doing is very much more in the area of governance of integration policy, which actually is one of the reasons that we even founded the center. MPI has had, through its international program, a fairly direct focus on issues of integration policy governance in its work with other countries, including, for example, Canada, Australia, quite a few European states, and also at the European Union level, with the idea that really to have a successful immigration policy, immigrants and refugees need to be able to successfully integrate into the society, that the policies can't be judged a success unless integration is a success. And so we've been very interested for a number of years now in trying to build what we call the brain circuitry of the federal government here in the U.S. To understand integration policy, integration impacts at the state and local levels, and to try and build better processes and policies for addressing them at the federal level. So it won't surprise any of you that we were so pleased that President Obama has opened up these new opportunities at the federal level for more dialogue and more coordinated action around addressing integration policies. So what did he do? Back on November 21st, President Obama released a presidential memorandum entitled Creating Welcoming Communities and Fully Integrating Immigrants and Refugees. Many of you have probably already seen it. We've also made it available via our website. The memorandum draws on prior proposals, some of which were in the Senate Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill that was passed back in 2013. It also draws perhaps more directly from language that was in the New American Success Act, a bipartisan bill that was introduced in the Congress last year. What it does, most importantly, is establishes a White House task force on new Americans. The task force is charged with reviewing the policies of all executive departments and agencies to look at their integration impacts, and then also, and this is the really historic part of what the President's done, is he's ordered the development of a coordinated national integration strategy that is intended to better integrate new Americans and support state and local efforts to do the same. The task force is co-chaired by the Director of the Domestic Policy Council and the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, and I believe it's almost 16 federal agencies and offices that are named as participants in the interagency task force. So within 120 days of the order, the President is supposed to be presented with a national integration plan by the task force. So that is due to be submitted to the President roughly by the end of next week. As we've heard, it's more likely to come out the week after, so a little bit more towards the end of March. A public input process was announced by the Domestic Policy Council. The input was due by early February. Then the interagency effort is reviewing all of those inputs, collaborating on recommendations that it's going to make to the President. You can see a fair number of the inputs that were submitted as part of this, as part of the effort on our website. We launched a new web page a few weeks ago. It includes not just links to the actual memorandum and descriptions of the process, but also we've posted recommendations from a number of groups that either covered a broad range of issue areas in what they submitted, or that themselves represent networks of stakeholders that are working on a particular important integration issue. So one of those networks and one of those sets of issues one of those sets of issues is those that are being worked on by the WE Global Network. WE stands for Welcoming Economies. That's a 10-state network of local immigrant economic development initiatives. And given the rich discourse that's been taking place about the role of immigrants and refugees in contributing to local economies and local economic development efforts, also the relevance of these issues to the creation of the National Integration Plan, we were delighted that Steve Tabachman was able to join us today in order to walk us through some of the top-line issues and recommendations that were included in WE Global Network's input to the Interagency Task Force. As you can see here, Steve represented a heavily immigrant district in the Michigan State Legislature, and during his time in office, he focused on a number of pressing immigrant community concerns. Since then, he's led research and policy development efforts that seek to unlock the power of immigrants to bring new vitality and growth to local economies, culminating both in the Global Detroit Initiative that he's extremely well known for, and also more recently in the establishment of the WE Global Network, both of which he directs. So Steve, I'll turn it over to you now. We're very eager to hear some of the top-line issues that are there in your recommendations.
Great. Thanks, Margie. And it's really, I want to thank MPI for putting together this series of webinars as well as hosting comments on the website. WE Global, or Welcoming Economies Global Network, is really part of an ever-evolving sort of kind of local network in reaction to and sort of proactive engagement on the issue of immigration. And so it seems like so much is happening. We're often scrambling to take advantage of what is going on in local communities in a way that moves this work forward. And without your help and folks like the J.M. Kaplan Fund, really, in Welcoming America, focusing us. I don't know that we would have been able to file our comments or understand, but we brought together our members and talked through some of the issues and create a fairly extensive list of comments that also highlight best practices. So let me tell a little bit about the WE Global Network, again, the WE for Welcoming Economies. Particularly in the last 5 years across the Rust Belt, local communities have come to the realization that immigrants represent a source of economic growth and opportunity for entire communities, for repopulating cities, for dealing with aging workforces and lost populations, stagnant populations, stagnant growth, as well as critical insight and talent to launch Rust Belt economies into the new economy. The 10-state map you're looking at, those dots are local initiatives that make up our network. And these local initiatives, as I said, most of them are less than 5 years old, like Global Detroit, St. Louis Mosaic, Global Cleveland, Vibrant Pittsburgh, Welcome Dayton, etc. And we have sort of found each other and realized a need to collaborate as we each seek to tackle creating more economic growth within our own regions by tapping into immigrants and integrating them into our economies and creating opportunities that really benefit everyone in our communities, including urban neighborhoods and suburbanites as well. Our mission is really focused on supporting the work that goes on the local level to maximize their impact, and we have some core values that focus on immigrant communities as assets that can be nurtured and grown as a part of a strategy to create economic opportunity for an entire region. You can find more information on the WE Global Network and, frankly, links to all those individual organizations, including a research page that kind of highlights a number of MPI research products as well as other national thought leaders about how impact local economies and particularly Rust Belt economies on our WeGlobalNetwork.org. It's the WeGlobalNetwork.org website. It also has links to our local organizations. This slide that is up now is taken from our comments, and one overall comment that we're not going to spend too much time on is that at times, I mean, the White House deserves incredible praise for being proactive about immigration, highlighting its local impacts, and talking about an integration strategy. These are very positive kind of transitions for federal immigration policy, and we strongly congratulate them. At times, however, I think some of our members feel that their folks can often talk about immigration in kind of a sort of a deficit mode about the struggles that immigrants and refugees can sometimes face, and while those struggles are real and we need to have a variety of things to prevent worker abuse and as well as immigration service abuse and go after predators on our immigrant and ethnic communities, we think that the strongest economic strategy is when we view integration and immigrant and refugees as assets upon which we can all benefit and create win-win strategies. And so we certainly provided some comments to make clear that we hope the final recommendations and strategy around integration stress those assets. I'm going to highlight our comments on 3 different areas. And I'm going to go fairly briefly and let you kind of read things on the MPI website after the webinar or through questions to get more deeply into this. So one area that a number of our local folks focus on is international student retention. We, in all of our comments, tried to highlight best practices that have emerged in kind of the Rust Belt, mostly in that 10-state region, but sometimes in other states facing similar economic challenges, because we think that the work is so innovative that understanding this kind of grassroots effort, and I use the global grassroots because it is locally grown, but often we are talking about sometimes some fairly important institutions like universities, chambers of commerce, governors, mayors, and really the major local players in some of these communities. So here are 3 efforts. I will talk about them very briefly. The Michigan Global Talent Retention Initiative, which launched out of the Global Detroit Strategy, is an independent organization that has 32 colleges and universities in Michigan as partners, and they also have over 60 employers. They help connect with international students on campus, convince them that Michigan's a wonderful place to stay after graduation and raise a family, highlight that we have a number of growth stackers, especially in the new economy areas, and then help employers, particularly those with STEM talent needs, to connect with the international students. You know, the reality is between 40 and 50% of all the masters and PhDs in engineering, life sciences, physical sciences, and computer sciences across the country are going to international students, and they can be and should be an important part of our talent staffing agenda. In Ohio, we highlighted the fact that the Board of Regents, out of some boilerplate in the state higher education bill, just underwent a study and published it that suggests that international student retention can be an important part of the future of Ohio's economy, meeting unmet talent needs, but also international students can enrich the experience of native-born Ohio students at their colleges and universities, and I provided the link to that. Finally, a very innovative program in Massachusetts where they are taking international students who are starting new technologies and ideas and patents while at the university, and the patent rates, production rates of internationals at universities are extremely high, and in many sense can represent as much as 50% of the patent production from our colleges and universities across the country in certain areas. So what Massachusetts has proposed to do is that they would become an owner, an investor in international student commercialized technologies that come into play while they're studying at a Massachusetts school. The student would sell their technology to the state university system, and the University of Massachusetts would then now become the business owner of this. It would hire the international student under a university H-1B. The proposal to do this is pending really at the Immigration Services. I don't know that they've gotten sign off. I haven't had an update for the last few months. So we think that's a very innovative approach to this opportunity. The recommendations for us is, you may know, currently the optional practical training component of an international student's F visa is for 12 months. And President Bush extended that an additional 17 months, making a 29-month total for international students studying STEM who work for employers using E-Verify. We recommend that maybe some additional extensions be awarded for critical need fields, that we look beyond STEM to areas where there might be significant labor shortages, and that we decouple the E-Verify requirement with this. Secondly, we recommended that we improve federal data collection about international students and their participation in the U.S. economy. We know very little about the matriculation of international students and how many stay, and how many H-1B holders are former international students, how many green card holders, et cetera. What's telling is we know from Vivek Wadhwa, Duke, and UC Berkeley's survey research is that high-tech entrepreneurs, immigrant high-tech entrepreneurs, that the average high-tech entrepreneur starts their business 13 years after coming to America, and the number one reason for coming to America is to study at American colleges and universities. So this is a real important pathway to understand more about. Thirdly, in addition to, well, really the fourth point is the International Student Entrepreneurship Initiatives, similar to what Massachusetts is proposing. Approving those or developing a system around that is clear would be helpful. But our third point under here is that, in fact, there are other visa E2, EB5, et cetera, that could facilitate international students becoming entrepreneurs. I'm going to move a little more quickly in the interest of time. I think I'm running a little bit over. So around entrepreneurship, We highlighted the Neighborhood Development Center out of Minneapolis-St. Paul, which works in a number of immigrant as well as minority communities, including African-American communities and Native American communities and Latino communities. They work in, I think, 6 different languages. It's predominantly a micro-enterprise training, lending, and support organization and a neighborhood community building endeavor. The Welcoming Center for New Pennsylvanians is a little less place-based in its endeavor, but it is really focused on the invisible hidden talent that exists. They offer sort of a case management referral system to other existing entrepreneurship programs. They run some very interesting English for Entrepreneur programs that give as many as 30 hours of coursework, not just around the English skills people will need to run a retail operation, but also understanding a little bit about bookkeeping, basic accounting, and U.S. laws. The Chicago Office of New Americans has done a variety of initiatives at the city office that Rahm Emanuel launched in 2011, and they have 5 or 6 different entrepreneurship initiatives, including promoting pop-up city services in immigrant communities, a chamber university, a small business incubator, and most importantly, both Pennsylvania and Chicago have, the cities have underwritten some loan funds to help small businesses. There are some very specific things that the federal government could do in taking its existing small business supports and working with those that have strong cultural competency, language access, and connection to immigrant and refugee communities. So there are sometimes one-off partnerships that local offices have, but we think a more formal evaluation of how to work through intermediaries and partner with intermediaries, because the biggest challenge often in getting to immigrant entrepreneurs is coming through institutions and organizations that are culturally sensitive and that are seen by immigrants and refugees as being friendly to them. Finally, this is not an area that we have had the opportunity to spend as much time as we would like, but you know, in rural Midwest, not just in agriculture, but also in small towns, immigration is having tremendous impacts in the last 20 years, and there's a number of folks, Brookings and MPI, that have talked about this, and it's happening in new and I think interesting ways. And so we highlight some of the programs that have been created, but they focus on both immigrant workers and kind of meatpacking industries and agricultural industries, as well as immigrant entrepreneurs in small retail establishments and struggling rural towns, small towns. And finally, there's an interesting program we highlight here, the second one in Ontario, where they have created a specific initiative for aging business owners, particularly in rural areas, to create succession strategies so that when somebody retires, the business doesn't go out of business and stop serving the community and stop providing jobs, but that they find new immigrants who can run those businesses and make that connection, and they've actually done that, I think, over a dozen times. We think that the federal agencies, U.S. Small Business Administration, Department of Agriculture, even I would say Department of Housing and Urban Development, run a number of programs that are very important to rural communities, and that being able to look at how they can support the entrepreneurship programs as well as some of the small towns would be an improvement from where we are today in integration. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back to Margie.
Great. Thank you so much, Steve. That's quite a tour of some really wide-ranging issues and some very interesting practices and recommendations. So now we're going to move to hearing from Annie Wilson. As I said earlier, we mean to treat these 2 areas, economic development and refugee resettlement, as distinct topics, but obviously they're also interrelated, and we thought that it would probably be easiest to start with the single issue of economic development and then widen out the lens to embrace refugee resettlement, which cuts across all 3 pillars of integration that the White House has organized its work around civic, economic, and linguistic integration. So Annie, we thought, would be a fantastic person to help lead us through that conversation. She's been with LIRS for almost 25 years. She first joined them to direct their national grants programs and technical assistance for asylum seekers, and now she's their Chief Strategy Officer, where she works with Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services Affiliate Network to broadly ensure that migrants and refugees are protected, embraced, and empowered in a world of just and welcoming communities. So we were so pleased that she'd be able to join us and share some of the vision and scope of LIRS's resettlement efforts, and also given the high visibility of the unaccompanied child issue, the fact that LIRS plays such an important role in the reunification of those unaccompanied minors with their family members, we thought they're in the middle of so many issues that it would just be very helpful to hear some of their recommendations. So Annie, turning it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Margie. Really appreciate having this opportunity to speak today, and also appreciate the warm introduction. Margie asked me to provide some context before going into the recommendations to give a sense of what kind of perspective my organization, LIRS, brings to this discussion, and to provide a little bit of background about the programming work that we do. So just first of all, I want to set us into context as an institution. We're 75 years old. We were founded as a Protestant charity at around the time of World War II to work with refugees and displaced people. And we work through networks of partners. Our primary partners are Lutheran social service agencies. Lutheran Social Service, they're analogous to Catholic charities or federated Jewish charities in the role that they play in communities doing broad-based human services. But we also work with a wide range of other organizations, legal defense organizations, child-serving organizations, and so on. We don't just serve Lutherans. For many, many, many decades, we have served people from all over the world through a range of programs. Just to give you a sense of refugee resettlement, LIRS is one of 9 national refugee resettlement organizations. Collectively, we work through over 200 affiliate offices. Our organization has 45 local offices doing this work, and in 2014, we resettled over 11,000 refugees. The primary nationalities being Iraqis. In 2014, it shifts every year. In 2014, Iraqis, people from Burma, Somalis, Bhutanese, these are ethnic Nepalis from Bhutan, and Afghans. We also serve people, well, and just to, the primary services that we provide are short-term in nature, 3 to 6 months. They're highly focused on early self-sufficiency, and they also help people just with sort of the basic material things that they're going to need to start their new lives, cultural orientation, assistance in language acquisition, just a range of services, but as I said, very heavily focused on early self-sufficiency and employment. And that experience that we have had now for many decades working in the refugee resettlement program informs our recommendations. What we see as the strengths of that approach, and also some of the concerns that we have about resettling refugees into working poverty. We also, as Margie said, do a lot of work with unaccompanied children from Central America, primarily from Central America, some also from Mexico and other countries. This is the story that hit the headlines over last summer when there were over 50,000 unaccompanied children that arrived in the U.S. These are primarily adolescents, we've been working with this population now for many years, not just in 2014, although the numbers increased a lot in 2014. Most of these young people are adolescents. There are a lot of legal issues at stake, and this is also a population that's had a lot of interrupted schooling. Most of them are joining family, and our services focus on reuniting people with their family members, but a significant number also don't have family, and we serve them through other kinds of programs like foster care. And then finally, the third major area of service that we engage in are services to detained immigrants. We have helped local partners do presentations on legal rights to people in immigration detention. We've identified and served people who are survivors of torture. We organize volunteer programs for people to visit immigration detainees, and we ran a drive right before the holiday season of Christmas cards and holiday cards and Christmas presents, and we were delighted that that drive generated 12,000 Christmas cards and over 1,000 gifts, primarily going to Central American families being held in the new family immigration detention centers in Texas, where the average age of the children is 6. That's a picture of what we do in the area of service for newcomers. I think it's also important to point out that a lot of our work is also with people in the receiving community, where we mobilize people to be volunteers, to sponsor refugee families, to be mentors, to visit people in detention, and to advocate for refugee and immigration issues. And that engagement with people in receiving communities, I think, has given us quite a window into what the hopes and concerns are of people who are in the midst of a lot of community change, what motivates them to get engaged, and has also given us a sense of how important it is to work with people to identify what the benefits to their communities are in terms of community dynamism and adaptability, very, very much along the lines of what Steve was talking about earlier. Let me just one more thing. All of the work that we do, with the exception of the work with immigrants in detention, is carried out in public-private partnership with the federal government. And each of those programs has a lot of federal departments with their finger in the mix. And those departments don't always connect all that well with each other in the way that the programs are operationalized. So, you know, from our perspective, as one of the refugee resettlement organizations and one of the child serving organizations, we just see these huge disconnects at the operational level between the different federal departments that are playing different roles, either in adjudicating cases, in care and custody, in the initial services to newly arrived refugees, and the long-term services. There's a lot of handoff problems. So to move now into the recommendations that are sort of informed out of this perspective that we bring to the conversation, I think, first of all, what we would emphasize from having been engaged with people across all of these dimensions of integration is that it's really, really important that collectively all of us engaged in integration maintain a kind of holistic vision of what leads to integration. We may each have separate parts to play, but having one of the elements weak really affects all of the others. So if somebody is not employed, they can speak all the English that you would want, and they're not going to be able to fully integrate into U.S. society. We would say equally, beyond the civic, economic, and linguistic aspects of integration, which really have to play together, that there are some other really critical elements, some of which people slot under one of those, but which we think bear lifting up in their own right. One is that social connections really matter, that social networks matter. People's friendships and also their more distant relationships with people who can give them access to employment opportunities, who can help them navigate their new communities, who can give them, you know, a sense of who's a good plumber to call. I mean, just all the ways that all of us use social connections, that when people are newcomers into a society or into a community, those social connections need to be built up, and they greatly, greatly help in the integration process. Other aspects that are really critical are things like healthcare. People's legal status is very predictive of integration and access to justice in general. And then something that we would emphasize as an organization that works with young people and also with our long experience in refugee resettlement is that the integrity and unity of the family is really essential. When people are worried about the well-being of relatives elsewhere in the world or unable to communicate, it's very damaging to people's ability to enter wholly into a life in their new community. So because a holistic approach to integration is so important, it's really critical that the different players addressing those different aspects of integration work well together. And I think we feel really strongly that that's not just federal departments playing with each other, it's the nonprofit sector working with the public sector, and it's also working with businesses and corporations. So multi-sector collaborations and interdisciplinary collaborations. And refugee resettlement in particular could really use some national coordination leadership. Margie asked me to touch really quickly on one of the LIRS programs, which is a national employment technical assistance effort that we call HIRE. It's a HIRE project under LIRS. And it is an effort that goes a long way toward bringing together multi-sectoral collaborations around the issue of refugee employment. It also supports governments and nonprofits and corporations, all three sectors, in good practices that allow refugees to succeed in the workplace and to enter into the workplace more successfully. And I think we feel that something like that should be replicated for the wider immigrant community, that both those aspects of the multi-sectoral collaboration and of the kind of very targeted assistance for developing things like in the workplace English language classes or civics classes or coaching for new immigrants on ways to be successful in the workplace. That those are all really good kinds of programs that help improve workplace participation and success. So I want to take 1 or 2 minutes, which I think I still have, to talk a little bit about our recommendations regarding youth. Although we serve young people of all ages, I think a particular focus is on adolescents, and particularly on adolescents who are joining school, perhaps after interrupted education, but certainly without English language proficiency. And we've seen tremendous success in programs that are targeted toward those newly arriving youth that are especially, that give them a kind of special leg up for a year or two, and then mainstream them so that they're able to be successful in the wider school community. And the Department of Health and Human Services has an office, the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which offers something called school impact grants to communities that have large numbers of refugees. And those school impact grants have been used by local school systems to develop some of these really innovative school programs. And I think we would see that as a really superb and replicable model that could be taken beyond the refugee community to the wider immigrant community. Another really critical piece of our recommendations regarding youth is to support leadership development. Again, the Office of Refugee Resettlement has just launched something that they're calling the Refugee Corps, which is a partnership with AmeriCorps, but which will be, where the participants will be former refugees, who will be providing leadership in their communities around around the services and the integration, cultural orientation for newly arrived refugees. Super great idea, and it really bears watching and potentially expanding. There's also some great programs like one that I cite here on the slide called Homies Unidos, which is a gang prevention program that's been that was launched by Central Americans, for Central Americans, and which just is a tremendous leadership development program for young folks, and which helps a lot with their civic integration and pride and dignity in their lives here in the United States. And then the work with the unaccompanied children's programs, it's really critical that we get this right with all of these tens of thousands of kids that have arrived from Central America and may arrive again now that the season is turning again. So we just need to make sure that that's adequately resourced. I think I'm out of time, so I'll just quickly note that in the longer paper, which I think you can find on the MPI website or through us at LIRS, we do have some other recommendations related to data collection, to broaden the matching grant program. I won't go into it, but it would be a good idea. And we would also recommend cultural competency audits for all federal departments to make sure that we're across the board meeting the needs of newcomers. So I'm going to leave it there, Margie. Thanks.
Thank you, Annie. Those are all quite tantalizing, those last few things that you put out there. There's just, seems like there's never enough time to discuss all the important things that are worth talking about in these issues. Well, so first of all, thanks everyone who has sent in questions already. Please remember events@migrationpolicy.org if you'd like to send in any more. I expect that we'll be able to get to them. I'm going to just take a few minutes quickly to add in some of the just particular issues and recommendations that are in MPI's paper to the task force. So in the area of economic integration, I would say that the recommendations we made around financial literacy, housing, some of the efforts of the Small Business Administration all sort of fall in this area. but I knew that we weren't going to have a lot of time to get to the very big issue about adult education and training, and there's just almost everybody who made any kind of recommendations, had something related to this issue area. So I just wanted to flag that both in the economic development arena and also in the refugee resettlement arena, that there's a hugely important role that's played by individual immigrants and refugees' human capital, which we would say includes their language skills, their education and training, sort of at the top of the list. And that what we see in the, just generally around the country, is that the provision of ESL and basic education classes meets only the tiniest share of need, often estimated to be only meeting 4% of the need. And then also that very few limited English proficient or low educated individuals are actually served in training programs that would help them really improve their earnings and move up the economic ladder. That's often estimated to be in the 5% range. And so there's a lot of deeper analysis about some of the things that are difficult issues that need to be solved in the system, and we just flag in our recommendations that actually some of the dynamics that we see with the lack of access for individuals make it worse under the new Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And then we call out in our recommendations some particular concerns where refugees are concerned, since the focus of the system and many services targeted to refugees is really welfare avoidance rather than helping them get to the level of training and education where they could make a family sustaining wage and be able to move ahead out of poverty. So I won't get into all of these. Please look if you're interested. They're up on the website. But among the recommendations that we make are, first of all, that there should be a doubling of the overall Adult Education and Family Literacy Act funds. Those are that's the main federal funding stream for adult education services. And then also the WIOA is what the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act is known as that moves forward, since there's such a danger that fewer and fewer low-educated individuals will be served, since the system already serves so few, and since higher level outcomes such as post-secondary, transition into post-secondary, completion of 2 years of post-secondary, those sorts of things will be favored under the new accountability system. We made a series of recommendations about how to make sure, how to attempt to have more equitable access for low-educated and or LEP individuals. Those include not just what you see there in terms of incentives rather than penalties for serving low-educated and LEP individuals, but also that there should be a new working group within the existing interagency career pathways group at the federal level to really take a look at these issues and make sure that they're addressed. Then particularly with regard to refugees, since we have seen in a lot of our work around the country that they are often very particularly in need of adult education and training services and not receiving them, that their education and training needs should be assessed prior to resettlement, and that there should be an estimate and a plan that's developed by the local partners that are involved in resettlement to ensure that those refugees have access to tipping point services. That's based on a famous study that came out of Washington State that showed that the biggest gains in education and training that push people forward out of minimum wage jobs and up to family wage sustaining jobs was the accumulation of 1 year of college credit or an employer recognized credential. So trying to get refugees to that tipping point is one of the things that that we and others that have been part of our work around the country have strongly recommended, along with the idea that the State Department or HHS, meaning at the federal level, that there should be more direct support to get refugees to that level, as well as more training for refugee caseworkers and time for them to support education success and persistence. Then looking at turning to some of what Annie said about late arriving immigrant and refugee students, we've certainly seen in our research around the country that there are a lot of problems facing refugees and unaccompanied children, other newly arriving youth who are arriving in the U.S. and trying to enroll in school at the middle and high school years. We often refer to them as students who need to do double the work, that they need to learn English plus pass all the content courses that other U.S. students that are in their classes are doing. They often have to fill gaps in their underlying education, and now that we have so many high-stakes tests for students, there's also the great pressure for them to be on track even in freshman year, even at the 8th grade level, in beginning to take some of those standardized high-stakes tests. So some schools lack the will, the capacity, maybe the know-how to help these students. We hear quite a bit around the country about schools trying to turn away these students. They're very afraid that the students might have a negative impact on their school performance, their accountability measures, and the like. And at the same time, there certainly is a legitimate argument that K-12 schooling that there is a cost shift involved with immigrant and refugee students coming into school, since this is a mandatory service provided by state and local governments. So it seemed to us that this is an area where we really could have more federal thinking and cooperation with state and local entities about how to better meet the needs of these students. So the series of recommendations that we made was that there should be a new partnership with mayors and school districts and other stakeholders working with the federal government to create goals and benchmarks for the effective integration of late arriving refugee and immigrant youth, that we should come to agreement across the levels of government about what the cost ranges are for services that are effective in supporting the sorts of educational, socio-emotional outcomes that we expect and are hoping for those children, and then that we should build a new consensus around what the federal funding approach should be for these essential academic and non-academic supports. In the past, there used to be an emergency immigrant aid formula that sent some money down to districts. In some ways, this is a suggestion to resuscitate that and just come up with a better version of it. And then I won't spend much time on language access right now, but since there were a number of terrific and extensive sets of recommendations submitted related to refugee issues. A very succinct set is on our website from Refugee Council, and then also the state coordinators of refugee resettlement submitted a very in-depth set of recommendations as well. There's a lot of overlap between some of those recommendations and ours related to language access. We'll talk more about a broad range of those recommendations in next week's webinar, but for now, I think many folks have noted that the increasing diversity of languages, some of which has been brought on because of the diversity of the refugee flow, creates new demands on local systems, and that low incidence languages are often more difficult for an array of state and local agencies to provide translation and interpretation in. And then actually, Steve, in the economic development arena, it turns out that we saw a lot of recommendations from groups saying that those agencies in particular at the federal level were pretty slow in meeting their responsibilities for outreach to diverse groups. So just generally, one of the things that we had put forward was that we thought the federal government really should take another look at language access issues and think about, work with state and local governments, really hear them out on a number of these issues and consider new solutions, especially what could the federal government do using technology better. There's a lot of technology that's been developed, for example, over at the Defense Department. How can some of those technologies be repurposed for use by states and localities? And also, are there some group purchasing arrangements that might bring down the cost for folks at the working these issues at the state and local government level? So with that, I think we will turn to some of the questions that we've received. And again, I welcome those of you who might want to still submit questions. This one, I think, is for both Steve and Annie. We had a set of different questions that came in that I think more or less were asking, you know, how first of all, can people access your networks and the folks that you're working with, because many of the initiatives that you described are of interest in terms of trying to bring them to other states and localities. And then also, are there any particular efforts that you have underway to try and maybe, you know, scale a little bit more some of the interventions that you have, you know, basically an appetite across a number of places wanting to know what might they do to try and connect with some of the services that you're talking about?
So this is Steve. Great opportunity to say some things I might not have said. First of all, I highlighted 3 of the areas covered in our comments. I think we might cover 10 or 12 different areas. So, you know, we talk about skilled immigrant integration and a whole host of other important initiatives in our comments. And so I'd encourage people to look at that. And they're obviously on your website. To access our network, to the question, again, we're at weglobalnetwork.org. That's W-E, globalnetwork.org, and you can, there's a wonderful research page that highlights research going on across the Great Lakes and the country on immigrant integration. There's links to all of our core members. And, you know, we're an initiative that Global Detroit staffs in partnership with Welcoming America. And we have also been working with Welcoming America to release a immigrant economic development guide that will have chapters on these topics. It's a little bit of an introduction to a how-to, how to think about immigrant entrepreneurship programs, how to think about tapping into immigrants and refugees to enhance exports and foreign direct investment, how to maybe launch a skilled immigrant integration initiative in your community, or tap into some of the national networks like Imprint and their membership. So that's, we don't have a release date, but we are probably 4 to 6 weeks away from releasing that, and you know, we will use MPI and others to help bring awareness around that. Lastly is one of the things that We Global Network is tackling is so much of the innovation, as you mentioned, around language access, but in all areas, is happening on the local and state level. Is we've started an Ideas That Innovate kind of list of policies. And so these are like 1 to 3 page descriptions of things like the Seal of Biliteracy, which I know is a core part of one of the E Pluribus Unum Awards that MPI gave out. We highlight that Ohio Board of Regents study and other best practices in state and local policy, that not just you know, policy ideas around what the federal government could be doing to immigrant economic development and integration, but really what state and local governments are doing. And so those will be on our website soon.
Thanks, Stephen. Annie, before you jump in, there's a kind of a big picture question that I think you might want to say something about. It's asking whether you can elaborate on the recommendation for a cultural competency audit. So could you speak a little bit about that, and, you know, sort of how does language access fit in with cultural competency? How is, you know, where is it different, and what would an audit look like?
Sure, thanks. So, well, maybe I'll first just give my website a plug and say that if there's any interest in access to LIRS or its networks, there is information on our website about all of our partners across the country and all of our programs, also multiple ways for individuals to get involved in some of the work that we're doing with receiving communities. And our website is pretty easy, lirs.org. And people should also feel free to contact me directly if you want to, awilson@lirs.org, and happy to connect people to anything. Linguistic, so to your broader question, Margie, about cultural competency and linguistic integration, they're very intertwined, of course, but it's not enough to be able to, access a phone line when you're speaking with somebody who needs services, for example, medical services, and get a telephone translator to take your words and translate them into the language of somebody that's sitting in front of you across a desk. There are tremendous cultural issues about issues of health, about how people understand family, about the way that people approach employment. We, for example, have developed some materials for the integration of Muslim women in the workplace. So there's all kinds of questions people have about wearing the hijab, or is it permissible in the Quran for women to work, that we address within the Muslim community, and then from the employer side about what can you ask a Muslim woman to do, or not, about cultural practices. So you can't get to those kinds of issues simply with language. And it's also really important that you are able to speak with people in their language, and that you or in a common language, and that you have that ability as well. So our sense was that in each of the major areas of the federal government, that it's going to be really important to see not only whether the services are available to people in a language that they can understand, but whether those services are being services are being delivered in a way that is reflective of cultural competence, so that people can genuinely take advantage of them. So I'll leave it at that.
Great, thanks so much, Annie. So, we did get a few questions from folks asking about immigrants who come to the U.S. and are underemployed, that they've obtained degrees or training overseas and have trouble getting professional level ESL, or filling gaps in their education as they try to become relicensed and re-enter their field here in the U.S. I'll say that I actually think all three of our organizations, MPI, LIRS, and we Global Network, have all done work in this area, and I believe we all have some of that in our recommendations. And it was also covered on last year's call. So for folks who ask that, if you don't find what you're looking for in our various recommendations, feel free to email any of us. But definitely that's an issue that's gotten a lot of visibility as part of the White House Task Force process. And I believe actually that LIRS was one of the first organizations to do manuals for how to help doctors and engineers and others in specific professions find their way back into the fields they were trained for here in the U.S. So I think there's a good number of resources just represented even here on the phone. So with that, let me say to any folks whose questions we didn't get to, we will email you directly about them. And otherwise, I want to thank everyone for joining us. Thank especially Steve and Annie for their terrific presentations and for the comments that, the documents that they produced that are available through our website and also through theirs. And this is the second of 3 webinars that we're hosting related to important topics that have been raised by various stakeholders as part of the creation of the National Integration Plan by the White House Task Force on New Americans. So the final in this series is going to be next Wednesday, March 18th, from 3 to 4 p.m. So we welcome your participation in that. We'll have a view from several mayor's offices in terms of the types of efforts and collaboration that mayor's offices are looking for across a range of issues, as well as a number of other cross-cutting issues that have been raised by organizations as part of this process. So again, many, many thanks to all of you, and we're eager to keep tracking these issues with you at what we think is a really historic moment in terms of both the President's actions and the possibilities for really moving ahead on integration policy in the U.S. Thanks again. Bye-bye.